to switch gears for a bit and talk about the business of space, the business of the moon. So pretty happy to bring on Laura. Let me read off her bio here. Laura Forczyk is the owner of space consulting firm Astralytical, specializing in space science, industry, and policy, and offering space career coaching services. She is a NASA subject matter expert for planetary science missions. She serves on the advisory boards for the Lifeboat Foundation and the Society of Women in Space Exploration. She serves as a mentor for the Brooke Owen Fellowship. Awesome, by the way. We'll talk about that in a minute. She is the author of Rise of the Space Age Millennials. Prior to forming her own company, she ran the Florida office of international startup, working to establish parabolic and suborbital flight at Kennedy Space Center and globally. She has also worked as a scientific analyst for a nonprofit facilitating over 50 experiments on the International Space Station for the benefit of life on Earth. She is pretty awesome. We're really glad to have you here. Thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you so much. So the moon has always been my thing, by the way. I do a lot of other things in space, but ever since I was in third grade, I decided I wanted to go to the moon, and that has not changed. So the moon is still my passion. If anyone wants to send me, I'm right here. I volunteer. So getting down to the business side of things, one of the questions I am most frequently asked is, why is now different than before? And maybe some of you are historians and can answer this better than I'm certainly on the younger side, probably, of the people in the audience. So you've lived through a lot of cancellations, right? We've lived through the cancellation of both President Bush's programs, the journey to Mars. There's been lots of changes in direction with NASA in particular. Why is now different? And one of the things that keeps being said over and over is now is different because of the approach, the public-private partnership approach and the international collaboration approach. And I find that interesting because we haven't proven it, right? If it works out, if we do get to the moon and we do stay there for a significant length of time, longer than Apollo, because Apollo did go there for several years, right? Then that will be so fascinating to look back at history and say public-private partnerships work. There is an economic, business, profitable reason for companies to want to do this. It's different. Okay, so back up a little bit. Why is it different this time? We all know, I mean, actually most of us know, there was a congressman in a recent hearing that asked Bill Nelson, why is it corporate involved now when corporations were involved in Apollo? So most of us know, but that congressman did not know that corporations were very involved in the Apollo program, right? But it was a different approach because NASA owned the hardware, NASA owned the direction, NASA owned the designs. It was NASA led. And now it is quite different in the approach in some aspects, where NASA has this pool of companies that they've chosen for the commercial lunar payload services, CLPS, and they are telling these companies, this is what we need. You figure out how to do it. Same with the human landing system, hopefully. I don't think that's going to change at this point, although some members of Congress wish it would. But hopefully it'll be the same thing. This is what we need. You figure out how to do it, and we'll pick you if we think your approach is the best and the price is right and that kind of thing. So that kind of change in mindset of fixed price contracting might make the difference. Maybe. What's in it for these companies, though? So what is unproven that is talked about constantly in the circles that I'm talking to right now, so you might feel called out, I apologize, but what's talked about constantly but not yet proven is mining. So I come from the background where my graduate degree in planetary science, which you have it wrong on the slide, by the way, I didn't actually finish my PhD, I'm all but dissertation, but my PhD research was to study lunar regolith. And so looking at the properties of lunar regolith and mostly how it moves and the difficulty of tracking it. And you might have seen some of the presentations about how it can, if there's an impact on landing, for example, the retro rockets can really get this stuff absolutely everywhere, like orbiting the moon kind of everywhere, even impacting Gateway in some way or another. There's some interesting work by Phil Metzger at UCF and Mass and Space Systems, really fascinating stuff. So I worked sort of on that, but on low velocity impacts, so really small impacts. But even in small impacts, lunar regolith is a real pain to work with. It's sharp, it is electrostatic, it is just a real problem. So are we going to be able to process, first off, pick it up, right? And NASA has a call out right now where they have asked companies globally, if you mine this stuff and just put it in a pile or put it in a collection bin, we will buy it from you. And that's a separate issue where it's actually trying to establish legal precedence. But that initial step of just picking this stuff up, that's the first step, right? There's a competition that's held, I think it's annual. I don't know if it happened with the pandemic, but it's at Kennedy Space Center, where groups of university students try to figure out how to mine a regolith simulant. And it's just fascinating. I was there when it was first started. It was called Lunabotics at the time. They changed the name. I don't remember off the top of my head what they changed it to. I haven't been involved since I moved, but it's just a really difficult problem. And that doesn't get into the problem of then once you have it picked up, how do you deal with it? Can you really break it apart as easily as we think? Can you really, process it as easily as we think? So all of these steps need to be proven before we can be sure that there is going to be a profitable return, either to use the resources on the moon for the purpose of whatever we're doing on the moon. So ISRU, in situ resource utilization, or taking it to orbit and using it for fuel depots, which is another problem because then you have microgravity, and everything in microgravity is just a lot harder than we used to. So we can do experiments on ISS, and we have done experiments on ISS on flow and fluid dynamics and that kind of thing, but it just has not been proven yet. Or maybe we take it back to Earth for some reason or another, or maybe we take it elsewhere. And it's just, all of this is very complex. And so when we're thinking about the profitability of mining, it very well could be that that is the first thing that companies latch onto to make a profit. But it's still a long ways away. It's still not the next 5 years kind of thing. Another thing that is talked about is tourism. And with good reason, I myself want to be a lunar tourist, or send me as a scientist. I don't care. I want to get to the moon, right? I'm sure a lot of you do as well. So tourism is an area where it's just beginning to start in suborbit this month, really, sort of, although Virgin Galactic is not flying tourists this month, but Blue Origin certainly is trying to, with whoever won that auction at $28 million. And then Wally Funk, I don't know if you can consider her a tourist necessarily, but they're trying, right? They're trying to do commercial suborbital spaceflight. Back in the 2000s, we started with orbital spaceflight, but that was with a Russian rocket, right? Russian technology, pretty much Russian everything, Russian training. The only commercial that was involved was Space Adventures, which is a commercial company that sort of was the facilitator and helping to get the customers and train the customers and prepare them. And so we're just now at the very start of suborbital space tourism and commercial space flight. And then arguably, in September, or as early as September, we might get orbital with that Inspiration 4 mission flying on a SpaceX Crew Dragon, free flying around the Earth, not to the International Space Station. So that might be the beginnings of real true commercial suborbital tourism, or I'm sorry, orbital tourism, if you want to call it tourism. Which I think it probably falls in that definition. How long until we can get people who are not trained professional astronauts, who are not government astronauts, or sponsored researchers? How long until we can get them on the moon? Well, it's probably going to be decades, right? And there's some other things that are talked about. Helium-3 research is talked about a lot. We're not there yet on Earth, let alone trying to deal with it on the moon. And there's lots of other ways that have been thrown around to make money, but we're just not there yet. So why am I being pessimistic, right? I'm not trying to discourage anyone. I'm trying to set a realistic standard that is not usually here in these kinds of talks. I'm trying to get you to realize that for the longest time, it really truly is going to be government directed and at the whim of government. And I'm not just talking about NASA either, because we do have the Russians and the Chinese who have partnered together with the, let's see if I can remember, I can't remember the acronym, International Lunar, you guys are shouting it at me, I'm sure. But anyway, they have their own lunar base idea. Now they have a different time scale, and I don't like to use the word race, right? Because it's such a different time scale that it's really not a race. It's a competition, sure, but they're not planning to send people to the moon until at least 2036. Whereas Artemis program is still saying 2024. We all know it'll probably be 2025 realistically, or even later, but hopefully, you know, sometime in the next few years, right? So totally different time scale when you're talking about a decade's difference there, 2024 versus 2036. But there are other governments involved. And then when you're talking about the Artemis program, it's not just NASA, it's also other government agencies around the world. There have been 12 signatories so far of the Artemis Accords. And those countries may or may not be sending people, but they're certainly involved in payloads and science, in whatever it is that they decide is the right way for those countries to get involved, is how they're going to participate. Now, there will be international crews on Artemis 2 will have a Canadian astronaut as well as NASA astronauts. And the plan is that Artemis 4, I think, is going to have an international astronaut as well, although that's not yet decided. Artemis 3 is going to be all NASA. But there is that change, right? And that is another change from Apollo, where it is very international rather than very nationalistic. Nationalistic in terms of it was US beating the Soviets, right? Yes, we had a plaque that said we came for quote unquote all mankind, but it was all NASA astronauts. It was all NASA, right? We did have some international partnerships involved in the whole process, but it was only ever going to be NASA astronauts that went to the moon during Apollo. Whereas now it's quite different, where we do want to bring in international collaborations. The interesting thing, going back to the whole concept of tourism, is that NASA has decided to take this approach where they are purchasing services from SpaceX. If that GAO protest holds, it'll be SpaceX for Artemis 3, and then potentially other competitors like Blue Origin for Artemis 4 and beyond. And NASA is not owning those vehicles. NASA is not owning that technology. NASA is allowing those companies to own their own technology, own their own hardware, and sell it to other groups, whether it is taking another government astronaut on board separate from an Artemis mission, or taking tourists up eventually, right? Elon Musk's plan for SpaceX from the start was to take people to Mars, and Mars is quite a distance away. And so if you're going to be thinking about taking people to the moon, we have already an example. We have Dear Moon Project. Do you remember that from like 3 years ago, where there's a mission on the books? Who knows when it's actually going to happen? They originally said 2023. We'll see if that happens, where they actually want to take a starship around the moon, circumlunar, and eight passengers and 3 or 4 crew or something like that. I'd have to go look it up again. But that is the beginnings of lunar tourism, right? You're not landing there. You don't have to worry about a lander. You don't have to worry about, eclipse on the moon and all of all the complexities of landing. You're just sort of doing a trip around. And that might be just the beginnings, right? Which is very exciting. I would go, and in fact, I applied for Dear Moon. I'm sure some of you did as well. I did not get to whatever the next round was, but I find that very exciting, the whole concept of SpaceX deciding that they could go ahead and take non-government astronauts around the moon. And of course, nothing is final until it actually happens, right? Things can be canceled, things can be changed, but I find this whole idea very interesting. So how does Apollo differ from the ways that how does Artemis differ from the ways that we have done it in the past with Apollo, with this SEI, with Constellation, all these other programs that just were insanely expensive or unrealistic and were canceled? Well, hopefully, if it's no longer just the whim of governments, then hopefully, whether or not a government initiative decides that, yes, we want to go full force to the moon, there's going to be some commercial incentive to keep on going or to keep on pushing. That's the idea. And I am not here to tell you the future. I don't know if it's going to play out the way that we all think and hope it will. And I know there's probably some people, not on this conference probably, but there are some people who wish we just go to Mars directly and ignore the moon. I've never been one of those people. I'm sure most of you are not as well. But sure, yeah, there are some people who think, well, maybe we need just to skip the moon altogether and go to where the passions of the public are, which the public actually actually does prefer, if you look at the polling, they prefer people going to Mars rather than the moon. And you've seen some discussion about that, especially during the Obama administration, where it was Journey to Mars. But I find it so interesting that we have those choices, right? It's no longer just one government program saying, we're doing this. It is lots of different companies saying, we want to do this. Lots of different countries saying, we want to do this. And all those different options. And whether or not there's the money and the technology and the motivation and the luck, because there's a little bit of luck involved too, right? Whether all that works together to have the options of saying, we want to be in low Earth orbit with commercial space stations. We want to be in the moon with Gateway around the moon. We want to be on the moon with these lunar bases that we want to establish. We want to, there's a concept of the moon village with the European Space Agency. We want to go to Mars with people, and beyond, right? And beyond was always tacked on there of where's beyond. Well, anywhere and everywhere, right? Within our solar system and eventually beyond. That's the science fiction-y kind of answer, but it's the truth, right? We're just not going to stop at the moon. We're not going to stop at Mars. We want to keep going. And having those options, I think, is invaluable because it gives us the opportunities to explore things in ways that we haven't been able to in the past. Because in the past, it's all been the government money. And realistically, commercial operations saying we want to do a space hotel or we want have not been realistic because it's been too much money and too much technological difficulty. But now that's changing. Now it's changing where commercial companies have the technology and the capability, where billionaires are spending the money, where it could be a different way to approach it, where NASA may be doing one thing, but a company may decide they want to also do something else at the same time. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this all turns out. I don't know if this is the kind of talk you were expecting, but this is what has gotten me most interested in Apollo. I'm sorry, in Artemis. And one of the things that I wanted to, I was talking about the difference between Apollo and Artemis the other day with a colleague of mine who was very involved in Apollo astronauts. And one thing that she talks about is how outside of the space community, it is not really known that Artemis even exists, let alone that this is the program that's going to be sending the first woman to the moon. Just by scanning the screen right here, I don't see any other female names. Maybe if I keep scrolling down, I'll see other female names, the other women on this call. But believe me, it's important to us women to see other women because for so long, women were excluded from even having the opportunity. And this is something that's come up recently with Wally Funk being chosen for Blue Origin. I'm so thrilled for her because those very qualified women that were training under that pseudo NASA program, it wasn't truly NASA, it was kind of imitating the NASA Mercury program training. They were incredibly qualified and yet not allowed to become astronauts. And so the society is changing and we need to not just say it's changing, we need to actually show the world that it's changing, how many female cosmonauts are there? Almost none. How many female taikonauts are on the Chinese space station right now? None. It's a crew of 3 men. It's very important that we not just say that it's important to have diversity, but we also demonstrate it. And also the person of color has been added recently to that little saying of we're sending the first woman, the first person of color. I don't necessarily like the phrasing of that, by the way. I feel like it's tokenism, but at least they're saying that that is a priority for them, that we are going to show the world that more of the representation of humanity can be going out and exploring the solar system, the universe. And I find that very, very important. Another thing that's very important, and Michael touched upon my book when I was introduced, when I was interviewing millennials. Millennials right now are in their 20s and 30s, all the way up to about 40. Millennials were not alive during the Apollo program. We did not see any landings on the moon. All we saw was shuttle, right? There's nothing, shuttle was fantastic, right? But it's not the same thing as landing on another body. So for millennials to see this is something that will probably change how millennials see the space program and how millennials can see themselves in the whole structure of the universe. And another thing that Michael touched upon is the Brooke Owens Fellowship. There's the Brooke Owens Fellowship Summit is going on right now. It's a fantastic group of women and gender minorities that they choose each year to do these internships in aerospace companies and then come together during the summit in person before the pandemic and hopefully soon after, and also virtually right now. And it's just, again, it's that representation. It's knowing that they had the opportunities, that it's not, it is for people like them, that they can go and get involved in aerospace companies and have an aerospace career. And they themselves can either work on programs to go to the moon or personally apply someday to go to the moon. These are all undergraduate students, so they're still a bit young. They're still trying to figure out their way. But I think it's super important to have that ability to show people that, yes, this is really truly happening, and it can be for people like you. And whether that's people like you, women, whether that's people like you who are not white, whether it's people like you who are not American and are in some other partnership, international partnership, an Artemis Accord signee, I don't know, but I think that's a really important thing to focus on. So I'm going to stop here. And okay, Michael says that more of our speakers are women. That's good. I mean, yeah, I did know that some of them. I didn't see them on the list. So great. I'm going to stop here and just open it up for questions. I don't know if you wanted me to focus more on the business side of things, but I can always answer questions.
We're good. We're good. And by the way, I'm really glad that you highlighted the Brooke Owen Fellowship. I really think that that's a super important organization, and the partner organization with Patty Grace Smith Fellowship. Like those are the industry has needed that for a really long time. So it's really good to see that. And what's your role there? That event is happening today, this weekend, right?
Yeah, it started yesterday. I'm an executive mentor and a coach for the challenge. So I really help out the students in any way that they can to have a great summer and have a great internship. And really, there's two different challenges, and I'm helping out with the satellites in orbit kind of challenge, where my group is trying to figure out how to clean up space debris and that kind of thing.
Cool. I'll post a link here, or you can post a link here in a second to both of those organizations. It's really neat. I'm just gonna read. Michael Mealing's always pretty opinionated, and I'm just gonna read his comment here. I definitely agree with Laura on this. He's talking about activity on the moon. I definitely agree with Laura on this. Unless and until there are large numbers of people who are willing to spend their own money to go and stay, it will be government agencies and thus very difficult to attract private capital. So you're the first person, and he's going to talk tomorrow about it's really hard to attract capital for lunar focused projects. Tons of stuff is getting capitalized if it's going to low Earth orbit, if it's a data play on Earth observation or something like that. Tons of capital is going to LEO. Almost no capital is going to the moon because it's governmentally focused. Do you have any thoughts on how to break that logjam? I mean, if you have an answer, I don't have an answer, so not to put you on the spot because it's hard.
I think it's just time, activity, maturity, right? That's how LEO got or is getting commercialized, right? It started out with government satellites or very few commercial satellites for decades, and then it diversified. And it diversified because we found more opportunities with different industries and more applications for these satellites. And I think it just is maturity of the industry and activity to show that it is happening. So it's almost a chicken and egg problem, unfortunately, where you have to have the money to do something to prove the activity to then get more money. But that's where the public-private partnerships can come in as well. Because if you get a government contract, that's proof that, yes, you're doing whatever the government is asking you to do, but that can also be dual use. And by dual use, I mean like government and commercial. I don't mean like military, although military is certainly involved, and military certainly has a lot of money to throw at Lunar as well. And so I wish I had a better answer, because it really truly is chicken and egg kind of problem. And I am absolutely horrible at getting money. So I defer to Michael Mealing on that kind of topic on how to attract investors. I just talk to investors and tell them what's real and what's not. But it's going to be maturity of the market. And right now it's brand new. I mean, it's really brand new. We haven't done anything like this commercially. Like I said, Apollo was all governments hiring corporations. This is such a new area.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing how this has evolved. For those who are sticking around later today, Laura has highlighted some of the stuff we're going to talk about later. Dr. Roger Lanius is a senior historian, and he's going to talk about kind of how we got here, right, from the Apollo perspective, because as you said, most millennials have never encountered, quote unquote, the glory days of NASA, right? Like the coolest thing we've ever seen, I'm a little older than that, but the coolest thing that most of us have seen has been a space shuttle, which is pretty awesome, but it's not an Apollo program. So, so Dr. Lanius is going to kind of bridge backwards in time to kind of showcase how two budgets, you know, a Soviet and an American budget with one goal, has evolved into thousands of budgets, thousands of organizations, lots and lots of goals. So that's going to be pretty fascinating. And Dr. Goswami is going to kind of catch us up to where we are currently. So you had a really nice segue for where we're going later this afternoon. One last question, because we're running out of time here, is Starship Singularity, right? Hashtag Starship Singularity. Do you have any predictions on when it's going to fly? You know, Musk talks about fleets of 100 starships. That feels like hyperbole, but I've been wrong about him a couple times now, so I'm going to kind of walk back that, and maybe it's there. So thoughts on Starship Singularity? Like, what does that do to our future?
It needs to be proven first, right? So I'm a bit more skeptical, right? I need to see this thing be proven, because so far it has not been to orbit and landed. And that's the very first step. I think that Starship, and I could be wrong, I don't know, you know, SpaceX's internal plans or Elon Musk's mind, but I think Starship will focus on the contracts that it currently has, which is NASA HLS and even Dear Moon as a step towards NASA HLS. There are other things that Starship could potentially do in the future, but those should be their primary concern. Is the you know, I remember back in the Commercial Crew Program days before they flew Demo 2, where they were a bit scolded by Jim Bridenstine. Do you remember that? For focusing so much on Starlink or whatever they were focusing on at the time, and not as much on what NASA was paying them to do. And I think that kind of did change their mind a little bit to really focus on, I mean, HLS is Artemis is such a huge high profile mission that I can't imagine that they're not going to focus so much attention on Artemis 3, because that is where everything else stems from. Everything on the NASA side for Artemis program will stem from Artemis 3. That's the first human landing since 1970s. Someone else tell me, I don't remember, 1970, whatever. And it is also the beginnings of them showcasing that, yes, we can land humans on another body. And remember, Elon Musk wants to get to Mars. So I can't imagine that they're going to focus on, you know, too much else initially. Beyond initially, though, I mean, there's so many possibilities. It's really hard to predict. So they're going to go where the market is, and I'm not them. So I can't tell you what their focus is going to be after that. But I want to see it proven first before I can say, yeah, it's going to revolutionize everything and change everything, which it could. I want to see it operational first.
Okay. Right on, right on. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Enjoy your time with the Brooke Owens Fellow Women this weekend. That's a terrific program. Thank you for taking time out of that to be a part of this today. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.